In 2017, I was asking myself some very powerful questions. I had just spent 8 months going through a period of depression after the passing of my favorite uncle. And I was asking myself so many questions about what it meant to live again. Grief has a way of bringing up these things for us. Grief has a way of showing us that there may be some cracks in our foundation. And when someone around us passes away, especially surprisingly or abruptly, someone that we didn't expect, we find ourselves asking these questions and reevaluating who we are and how we show up in the world. And that's where I was. I was asking myself a lot of questions in 2017. And one of the questions that I asked myself was, what is self-love? And how do I get it? During this time, everybody on Instagram was talking about self-love. They were talking about loving yourself and, taking days to go to the spa and going to get massages and getting your nails done and, getting your feet done and all of this activities that you can do to experience self-love. And I was intrigued. I was intrigued because number one, I was asking myself those questions, what it meant to love myself. And number two, I was intrigued because I don't think I had a pause to look at what self-love was, what it meant, and how I was experiencing it. And that's one of the things that happens when you are used to experiencing life without pausing and reflecting. You find yourself asking questions when you experience a huge transition. And I was in that space. And I began to wonder, what is self-love? If it's love of the self, why I don't feel it? Because it's self-love. And I began to dive deeper into this topic. And I learned quite a few things that I didn't know self-love was, that was very uncomfortable for me. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about today is looking at self-love from an expanded lens. Because when you look at self-love from an expanded lens, you're not going to be limited to how other people view self-love. In this video, I actually also want to give you some insight on how you can tap into self-love, because self-love is not something that is out there. Is something that is in here. It's how you feel about yourself. How you feel about yourself happens in here. So I'm going to share with you some strategies to help you navigate this and return home. The first thing I want us to have is some context and to be on the same page about what self-love is and how we look at self-love. Now, we tend to have, as a society, many different ways of looking at self-love. And one of the dominant ways in which we look at self-love is through physical and materials. Physical health and material possessions. Okay, so we look at self-love a lot based on physical health. We look at, are we exercising? Are we exercise, drinking water? We look at eating healthy. We look at sleep more recently. We look at eating. Are we eating? Are we working out? Are we sleeping? Are we drinking water? Some of us also look at reading as self-love. What are we feeding our brain? But I'll get more into that in a second. And then we look at, I say material possessions. What we're really talking about here is not material possessions, it's experiences. Okay. Here we talk about going to the spa. Here we get into out with the girls, night out, or brunch, or whatever you do with your girlfriends. Here we also get into trips. Here, massages, which is kind of the same like going to the spa, but you never know. And then we get here like grooming. That's another form of self-love. We got nails, toes, brows, hair. So what I discovered was that most of us have this perception of self-love going, where it includes physical health and it also includes my experiences. So I was looking at self-love from this perspective of I have physical health and then I have experiences. And this is what I discovered most people look at self-love as. And when I learned this, it was very encouraging because up to this point, I hadn't been asking myself questions about self-love. And what I discovered was that I was already engaging in it. Because part of self-love is these things. I was working out. I've been working out for most of my life because my mom was a dancer. So I've always been into dancing. And with dancing, you got to stretch, you got to be in shape. So that's been a big part of my life. I have been eating healthy. I started that journey in 2010 when I got really intentional about that. So like I have been at this for years before I even knew that I was engaging in self-love. And that's one of the things that happens when you start to learn about self-love. You start to realize that, and I say this all the time, lack of knowledge doesn't equal lack of existence. Just because you don't know you're engaging in self-love doesn't mean you're not. Because once you start to learn about self-love, you start to see all the ways in which you are engaging in self-love. And that's one of the things that happened to me. I began to realize that, okay, I actually engage in these practices. I am doing some of the things that self-love is talking about. I'm eating healthy. At the time I was training for marathons, I was exercising because I was running quite a bit. I was averaging anywhere between 15 to 20 miles a week only in running. And I was very adamant about my sleep because that's required when you're training for a race. You want to make sure that your sleep is optimal. And I also was reading a lot. I was reading a lot about different runners. At the time, I read this book called Born to Run, which really taught me a lot about running, especially the use of chia seeds, which this author was learning from this Mayan, I think, tribe in Mexico. He was going to see them run, and he learned about chia seeds, and that's one of how I got into chia seeds. It was through those books that I was reading about being a better runner during that period of my time, of my life. And then here I was doing the other things, like I was going out with my girlfriends, I was taking trips, I was going to the massage spot. I love going to the spa. It's one of the things that brings me the most joy. And also doing grooming. Like I'm the type of person that always likes to have her nails done, always likes to have her brows done. Like as I reflect back, I didn't know what self-love was at the time. And when I started to learn about it, I realized, oh, I'm doing this thing already. Now the question became, if I'm doing these things, why don't I feel it? Why don't I feel that I am loving myself? Why do I feel like that love is missing? And here's when things become really interesting. One of the things that I learned when I began to embark on this journey of self-love is that we have something called the inner critic. Critic doesn't have a T. The inner critic. And the inner critic is this voice that we hear within ourselves that is constantly critiquing and judging everything that we are doing. Where does the inner critic come from, and how does it take power over us? You want to think about the inner critic as a collective voice. And this collective voice represents all of the conditioning that you have absorbed throughout your life. When I'm talking about the conditioning, I am talking about all of the things you've learned you had to be in order to be a happy human being. So that includes the thoughts you had to have. That includes the actions you had to engage in. And this also includes the feelings you're supposed to have. All of these things we are taught. I remember reading The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and he talked a lot about what goes into a domestication. And the domestication process is that in which you go through in order to be inducted into society, in order to be able to function like a human in the society that you are born into. And through this process of domestication, you are going through a conditioning process where you are taught ways of thinking, you are taught beliefs, you are taught ways of being. It's like teaching a child how to read and telling them, hey, this is a tree, and then showing them a picture of a tree. And you start to make these agreements that, okay, yeah, you guys say it's a tree, then it is a tree. You guys say that this is a fork, then it is a fork. You guys say that I am a girl, then I am a girl. If you guys say this, I'm on that. So you begin to make these agreements. I highly recommend the Four Agreements as a text for you. And this is the type of text that you're going to read, recommendation, over and over again. I've been reading this book every year, multiple times in the year. I would say at least 3 to 4 times every year since 2018. And every time I read it, I learn something new. Every time I read it, I am expanded. Every time I read it, I tap into deeper sources of self-love. So if you want to tap into deeper sources of your self-love, I got you. I got you. Take your time. Take your time. Take your time. So the inner critic is the collective of who you thought you need to be. This is you. Let's draw a little afro here. And you're thinking, I need to be this. I need to be all these different things. I have to act in this way. I have to show up in this way. I have to say these things. I have to do these things. Here's where we begin to receive things like people pleasing. Why? Because what starts to happen is you learn that you got to put people ahead of yourself. Especially if you're a woman, these are some of the messaging that you are receiving. You are a nurturer, so you got to care for others before you care for yourself. You hear messages around, you got to make sure that everybody's good before you are good. You hear messages around, you got to make sure you check in with people before you make a decision. Those things all lead to people pleasing because you're looking to please someone outside of yourself. And when you become attuned to the frequency of self-love, because self-love is not a destination, it is a frequency. Self-love is a frequency. And when you attune yourself to this frequency, you're going to start to notice some things are going to come up for you. And one of the things that's going to come up is the energy of people pleasing. This is going to show up for you, and you're going to notice it in the form of the inner critic. The inner critic is going to start talking. You're going to hear this voice that starts to tell you you're doing things wrong, or you gotta make sure you do what so-and-so said. Have you checked in with your mom? Have you checked in with your partner? Have you done this? Have you done that? This voice that's saying, if you are a good person, if you are the type of person that is accepted in this society, here are the ways in which you got to show up. And we start to believe these things. We actually move very in alignment with these things that we have believed. And the inner critic is actually very powerful because it's mirroring to us. It is mirroring to us the beliefs we have adopted. It's mirroring to us the thoughts, the ways of being, the feelings, all of these things that we have learned. The inner critic comes here and starts to show us this. Now, what does this have to do with self-love? Well, one of the biggest challenges people experience with self-love is their self-talk. What is the self-talk? The self-talk tells you what to do. It tells you how to feel about it. And it tells you if you did a good job. Now, most of us have experienced having what people call negative self-talk. Where the things it tells you to do are what you will consider negative or bad things. It may tell you to do things that don't serve you. So if you have decided you're going to eat healthier and exercise, your self-talk might say, you can't keep this up, you're not good enough, you're this, you're that, or you're not worthy of this. Like, your self-talk is going to talk you out of what you want. And then it's going to help you, it's going to tell you to feel bad about it. And when I say bad, I'm putting this in quotation marks, it's actually leading you to feelings of feeling unpleasant, feelings that emerge when you're going against yourself. And then it's going to say, you never do a good job. Here is the funny part, though. You will think that the opposite of this will be positive self-talk, right? Where it tells you to do what you want. It tells you to feel good. And it tells you that you always do a good job. You always win. The interesting thing about this is that there is no negative and then there is no positive. When it comes to your self-talk, if you focus on this is negative self-talk and this is positive self-talk, this is talk that is self-love and this talk that is not self-love, that's not going to serve you, because the talk itself is neutral. You're the one that are giving it the meaning. And this is something else that I learned about loving myself. You give self-love the meaning. What do I mean by that? It means that you get to decide how you're going to feel about the conversations that are happening with your inner critic. You get to decide how you're going to respond to those conversations. When you're hearing things that you deem as negative, now you can categorize and determine, well, how do you respond to this energy when it shows up? And then when you see things that you deem as positive, you can also look at how do you show up to these things. These are also parts of self-love. So when I started this video, I started with telling you that I was focused here. Here are the things I was doing. I was doing the physical health. I was doing my experiences. There are other elements to self-love. One of them being personal accountability. I started to look at myself outside of the things that I felt came easy to me. And I started to look at the things that were stretching me. For example, I noticed that I am really great at being able to get in shape. Get in shape, drop weight, whatever you want to call it. I'm really good at that. I can, if I set my mind onto something, when it has to do with my physical health, it's a done deal. That's how I was able to run my first marathon in Yonkers. 2 years later, I did my second marathon, the New York Marathon. I have been a pole dance instructor. I have been dancing pole for, 6 years, 7 years, 7 years now. All these things I've been able to do mentally because I can set my mind to something and I can achieve it. There are other areas of my life where I'm not bringing that same energy. And I became very curious about that in my journey of self love, because one of the things that happens when you are learning to love yourself and tapping into the frequency of self love is that you're going to expand your self awareness. You're going to become very clear about you. Specifically, when I'm talking about self-awareness, I'm referring to your thoughts, your beliefs, which is a thought that you keep on thinking, your feelings, your actions, and I'll put here your decisions. These are the things that you're going to become very aware of when you begin to tap into the frequency of self-love. You're going to expand your self-awareness, and this process can become very uncomfortable for you. And that's something that I want you to know in advance. There is a part of the process that feels uncomfortable because you're learning something about yourself that it is unknown territory. It is unknown territory to your conscious brain. However, to your true being, the light that you are underneath this physical body, you already know this stuff. However, it's important that you kind of forget it to ensure that you're having a human experience that can be full of love and ease and a flow. So the more you tap into this frequency of self-love, the more you start to look at yourself. You start to expand how you see yourself. You start to see yourself from a different lens. And that means that there may have been things that before you weren't aware of. There may be patterns of behavior that at first you weren't noticing. And now you start to notice those things. An example what this looks like is I want to be transparent about how it has showed up for me. Early in my journey, I want to say 2 years into learning consciously about self-love, I began to notice that I had an issue with timeliness. This began to show up for me because I was taking I was doing a business course, and part of the business course, the mentor was encouraging me to send an email out to my closest friends and family and co-workers. I believe in business colleagues, no, not family, friends, people that have worked with me in different spaces and even from different circles, and asked them what they could count on me for, what they couldn't count on me for, and what was my unique gift or ability. If you have never done anything like this, I highly recommend it. I actually got this from a gentleman. His name is Sam Evans. Hey, Sam. And I recommend that you send this out to your people and you take an assessment of yourself through this exercise because it was very eye-opening. And one of the things that it revealed to me was that I could not be counted on to be on time. This was shocking to me because up to this time in that moment, I didn't know that that was something that people felt about me or that they had observed about the way I moved, because I hadn't been looking. And I used to make excuses for this behavior. And when I tell you I used to be late, I used to be late. Like, I'm talking about missing flights. I'm talking about missing train rides. I'm talking about paying triple for a train ride or a flight because I missed the flight because I did not get there on time. I thought I had more time. I overextended myself and I wasn't accountable to myself and to the commitment I made around my time. And this was very uncomfortable for me because I hadn't looked at this area of my life. And the fact that so many people were aware of this and were not really bringing it up to me except my husband. And with him, I wasn't listening because my husband. And I began to see like, okay, maybe there's something here for me. Maybe I can start to change the way I show up to these things because I became aware. I expanded my self-awareness. I started to see how I was acting. And then I began to see how it felt to act like that. And I didn't like it. I didn't like how he felt. And then I began to see how I could make different decisions around this. And then I began to look at what beliefs I have adopted. How did I get to this point that I didn't care about my time and how I was utilizing it? And then I began to look at what were the thoughts that were leading to that. So this is what starts to happen when you embark in this beautiful dance of co-creation that is tapping into the frequency of self-love. You begin to look at yourself through this new lens, and then you begin to see that there may be some things that you hadn't been engaging in. And for me, that was personal accountability. I was really great at making excuses for myself. I was really great at thinking about the things that were not my fault. And I wasn't paying attention to the true game changer. And that's your part. We all have a part in situations. We all have a part in the environment that we are in. We all have a part in a contribution to the life that we are living. What is your contribution? Do you ever pause and look at your part? Do you look at how you are adding to the thing you're experiencing? Do you look at how you are contributing to the situation that you don't like? This is also part of self-love, y'all. And I feel like this is the part of self-love that often gets left out of the table. Because when I began to learn about self-love, it was about the spa. It was about the massages. It was about the nails and the toes and the hair and this and all these other things. And self-love can also be about that. Well, at the same time, when you want to get deeper, because that's the thing about me, I like to get underneath the root. I like underneath the hood. I like to get to the root of what things are happening. That's when I began to realize, okay, this is not working. Because I am making excuses for myself. I am being a victim. And I'm not a victim, I'm a force. And if you're thinking, I am in this place where these things can't happen to me, these things are, I'm past this, that's when you're more vulnerable to these things. Because you're thinking that you are better than it. And when these things occur, they're not occurring because you're not good enough. It has nothing to do with your self-worth. When you are experiencing tapping into self-accountability, when you are attuning yourself to the frequency of self-love, you're learning to go through a healing journey. And you start to realize that self-love is deeply spiritual. Self-love and spirituality are literally one of the same. Because to love yourself is to love all parts of yourself. And all parts of yourself are not limited to who you are. They're also part of your bigger experience. You are expanded into Mother Earth. You are expanded into the universe. All of that is yourself. So when you begin to embark in this adventure of attuning yourself to the frequency of self-love, you are choosing to go on a very deeply spiritual process. And this is why personal accountability becomes so important in your journey. Because you gotta be willing to see how you are contributing to your journey. Once you see how you're contributing to your journey, you can focus on what you can control. You can focus only on what you can control. And you can take your time. One of the biggest misconceptions of self-love is that it needs to happen right away. It needs to be rushed. Why am I not loving myself yet? What is wrong with me? We start to perceive ourselves through the lens of our conditioning, through the lens of the person we've learned we need to be. And I want us to take a look at what does it even mean to be spiritual. So when it comes to the term spiritual, it comes from the word spirit. And the root of the word spirit, Latin for spiritus, means breath. Self-love at its core is about your breath. It's about how you are responding to your breath. It's about how you're showing up to your breath. It's about how you are operating with your breath. and looking at your role in that relationship. There were a few things that I had not had in place that were impacting my ability to love myself. Let's look what they are and see if you have these things in place for yourself. One, I just talked about personal accountability. This is being able to see your part in situations. See your part. The second thing I didn't have in place was a process to take inventory. And this simply means seeing who I became, who I was, seeing myself. Then, the other thing I definitely didn't have in place was boundaries. This is being who you desire. The fourth thing I didn't have in place was grace. Being kind, no matter the outcome. And then the fifth thing I didn't have in place were reframes. New ways of seeing my reality. Let's go through this individually and I can talk through them with you a little bit more. So the first one is personal accountability. I've talked about this. This is your ability to see your part in situations. When you are tapping into the frequency of self-love, you gotta see your part, because when you see your part, you can learn from your part. That is the core of what this video is about. It's about you learning about yourself, tapping into what you're learning and applying it into your life. This is super important and powerful, because then you can use what you are learning to transform your life from a position of power and to do it while living the life that you desire, which is what I desire for you. Then it's taking inventory. This is seeing who you are, or seeing who I was. When you are tapping into self-love, it's so important that you are constantly taking inventory of yourself. And not from the perspective of you are a project that needs to be fixed and something is broken. No, you are whole, okay? And I'm going to say this one more time for you. You are whole. You are complete. You have everything within you to experience the things that you desire. That you have everything in you to journey life lovingly and joyfully and abundantly. You're not missing shit. You got it. You are literally stardust in motion. You are literally God, made in God's image. Like, you don't need anything else to tap into this. It's you. It's you being able to tap into yourself. It's you being able to create conditions so that you can see yourself clearly. It's you having an inventory of who you are being, and then taking a look at that inventory and determining what changes you desire to make. That's what self-awareness is about. It's your ability to look at how you're acting versus how you think you're acting. I say this to my clients all the time. Write this question down. You can also drop the notes in the comments if it helps you. So this is how are you acting versus how you think you're acting. We be acting one way and we think we're acting in a different way. So having a way that you can look at yourself, be it through journaling, be it through, journaling is really the most powerful way to do this. This is why I'm drawing a blank, because that's the way that I do it and the way that I've seen it be done best. So you can do it through journaling. You can do it through working with a mentor that mirrors back to you and can ask you some of these questions to help you assess yourself. Having an inventory is very important because you got to know who you are being. You got to know so you can make a decision on if you want to amplify that or not. After that, there's boundaries, because once you decide that you want to make some changes, once you get clear on what self-love you want that to be, because self-love is not the same shit for everybody. What self-love means to you is going to be different than what self-love means to me. And we may have some points of intersection, and it doesn't mean it's going to be the same thing. I know people that hate going to the beach. Like, they don't want to be nowhere near the sand, nowhere near the sun. They are not interested. For me, that is pure self-love. Give me a beach, a cabana, a nice book, a playlist, and I'm good. That's me. That's not them. Everybody's going to have a different definition of self-love for themselves. We both like to relax, but the way we go about relaxing is different. So these are the things that you want to be aware of in this journey of tapping into that frequency of self-love, is that you get to define what self-love means like to you. And once you define what self-love means to you, it's important that you put boundaries in place. That you put these boundaries in place so that you can be who you say you are. People often misconstrue how to operate with boundaries because they start to think that people gotta quote unquote respect, in quotation mark, their boundaries. And nothing can be further from the truth. Boundaries is not something outside of yourself. Boundaries are not something you hold other people accountable to. And this is why accountability is so important, because boundaries start and end with you. You get to be the person that upholds these boundaries, not by telling people, hey, don't call me after 10 o'clock. No, by choosing, I'm not going to answer if the person calls. You see the difference? There is the, hey, don't send me emails after 5 o'clock. I'm with my family. And then there is the, I didn't even see the emails you sent me because I was with my family. You see how this is happening? You get to be the boundary. It's not something you outsource to other people. And most of us find ourselves outsourcing this shit to other people and then being irritated that it's not working. Being irritated that people are calling you after the hours you said that you don't want to be called. You start getting upset and resentful because people keep on asking you for things that you already said you didn't want to do or engage in. You start to get really irritated because people aren't respecting you and respecting your desires. Meanwhile, that's all happening because you're putting that responsibility on someone that you can't control. This is why focusing on what you can control is so important in self-love, because to love yourself, you get to pick yourself. You get to choose who you're going to be. You get to decide how you're going to support that version of you. And if that means that people can't have access to her, then people can't have access to her. And that's something that we're not able to outsource, because you got to be the bouncer at your own life. You ever been to the club? When I was in New York, I lived in New York. I used to go to the club, and they always had some crazy looking dude outside checking IDs, making sure that whoever was supposed to come in came in, and whoever wasn't, and they had to get somebody out. They were strong enough to get that person out. You are now the bouncer of your life. You gotta stand at the door and determine who gets access and who doesn't. And you get to do that. You get to be selective about that. And self-love is the act of being selective about this. And here's where things get uncomfortable. I mean, they're going to get uncomfortable the moment you start. However, it gets very spicy right here, because here's where you got to start telling people no. Here's where you got to tell people no, and you got to tell yourself yes. And this is really triggering. You'll quickly learn here that I'm really focused on going towards the things that trigger me. I'm not interested in hiding behind them or pretending they don't exist. Even when I engage in that behavior, I'm very conscious that I want to address what triggers me, because I don't want that to have power over me. And what you're going to experience here is you're going to be very triggered. This is what I call the self-awareness phase when I teach my clients. because I have a whole system I walk my clients through, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're desiring to enjoy your life at a deeper level, you are desiring to enjoy your success and to show up to it with the energy of love, then come talk to me, because that's my zone of genius. That's where I play, and that's where I'm really, really the best in the world at. And I teach my clients. I'm literally showing you the things that I teach my clients. I teach my clients these 3 steps here. And this is part of what we call the self-awareness phase in our signature solution called the self-trust system. And I tell them that when they are here, they gotta be prepared to be triggered. They gotta be prepared to be triggered because there's so much you're gonna learn about yourself that you weren't looking at before. And self-love can be very triggering. It can be a very triggering experience. Most people don't realize this. So when they begin to tap into the frequency of self-love and they get triggered, they get discouraged. They get very discouraged. And I don't want you to get discouraged, because this is part of you building the new version of yourself. This is part of you showing up to yourself powerfully. This is part of you trusting yourself. And at the heart of self-love is self-trust. Because self-love is the same as self-trust. The moment you start to love who you are by putting these things in place and looking at yourself from this angle, is the moment you are learning to trust yourself. You're learning to trust yourself at a deeper level. And this is going to be required, because most people got self-trust fucked up. It's not something that's binary. It's not the thing that whether you have it or you don't have it. No, self-trust is something you experience deeper levels of. There are some parts of your life where you feel so much self-trust, you don't even think about it. Self-trust is the elixir. It's like, not the elixir. Self-trust is like the source, the juice that gives confidence its power. Before you feel confident, and to feel confident, feeling confident comes from doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting success and getting results that you desire. That breeds your confidence. So once you feel confident, that can only happen because you trusted yourself to take the action in the first place. So self-trust is the prerequisite to self-confidence. And self-love is self-trust. So when you are focusing on loving yourself by doing these things that are going to feel uncomfortable, you are strengthening your self-trust. And I can do a deeper dive into self-trust. If you want me to, let me know in the comments below, and I would do that. Because I love self-trust. Self-trust is like the secret. If there was a secret, it would be that. It's the ability to trust in yourself, to trust that you are God manifested, to trust that you have everything within you to experience whatever you desire. Your wants desire, you can have them. That is what self-trust is about. And it's the same as self-love. So when you are learning to love yourself by looking at this part of you that feel uncomfortable, you are learning to grow your self-trust, and that also leads to you having a deeper level of confidence because you know your receipts. You know what you can do. So boundaries is when it gets spicy, because you start to get triggered. You start to tell people no. People don't want to hear that. People want what they want it. And then here you begin to experience the discomfort that comes from that. And that's why you got to have a way to give yourself grace. Giving yourself grace is really important, because it is in that moment when you look at the parts of you that are uncomfortable and you give yourself grace that you grow. It is in that moment that you expand. It is in the moment that you practice self-care, because you care for your heart. You care for how you are feeling, and you nurture yourself through the moments that feel very uncomfortable. Because when you're putting boundaries in place, if you have an unhealthy relationship with your inner critic, this is going to get loud. And the inner critic will show up in the form of people pleasing. Hold on. There you go. You will show up in the form of overthinking. You will also show up in the form of perfectionism. And it will also show up in the form of controlling the uncontrollables. My husband is in the background playing some music. We'll see if we mix it, if it's too loud for us during the edit. So these are the ways in which the inner critic shows up. It shows up in the form of people pleasing, in overthinking, perfectionism, and looking to control others. So when you are experiencing your process of attuning yourself to the frequency of self-love, you will encounter this. You will encounter parts of yourself that tap into people pleasing. You will encounter parts of yourself that start to overthink. You will encounter parts of yourself that are heavy into perfectionism. This energy that I'm constantly keeping an eye for, because I know that I have the tendency to want to really harbor and get stuck on the energy of perfectionism. And then you start to want to control the uncontrollables. You want to prove that you can make things go faster. You want to feel like you got to be 10 steps ahead of the game, and you don't want to like where you are. So you want to expedite the process. And in that, you try to do it by controlling what's outside of your control. These are the ways in which the inner critic is going to manifest in your life when you are going through that journey of self-love. And it has a very intentional purpose. It will help you give yourself grace. It'll help you be compassionate with yourself. It'll help you be gentle with yourself. You'll learn in those moments to be kind to your heart, to be at peace with where you are, to honor your pace. Those are the principles of self-love. It's your ability to love yourself no matter what, no matter the outcomes. I like to really focus on loving myself no matter the outcomes. And once you're giving yourself that grace where you are at peace no matter the outcome, then you can start to look at yourself differently. You can start to reframe your reality. My clients low-key call me the reframe queen, because I always got to reframe for them, no matter what happens and what they bring my way. If there's a reframe, I give it to them. I give it to them wholeheartedly. So returning to our first piece of this, which is this. To tap into the frequency of self-love. Yes, having the physical health is important. Yes, having these experiences is also important. Yes, we want to have these things in place where we're taking personal accountability for ourselves. We are taking inventory of who we are. We're looking at our part. We're looking at who we want to be. We're looking at being the person that shows up in that way, being who we desire to be, putting boundaries in place, being the boundary, not just putting the boundary in place, being the boundary. If you tell somebody, don't call me after 10 o'clock, you don't even be looking at the phone at 10 o'clock. Having the grace for the moments when you do look at the phone, having the grace for the moment when you do not honor your boundaries, and then reframing how you look at things. Yes, this is all very, very important. And the thing that matters most in this journey, the thing that you want to make sure you take with you from this video, is this question. Who would you be when loving yourself feels hard? Because you see, believe it or not, doing the physical stuff is easy. Going to the gym, working out, that's easy. Eating healthy, that's also easy. I know some of you may be looking like, no girl, that is super hard. It's actually not. It's really easy. You can outsource that. You can get a meal prep service that sends you food to your house, and boom, you know what to eat. That stuff is easy. What's going to really test your ability to love yourself and attune yourself to that frequency of self-love, it's going to be this. Is who would you be when loving yourself feels hard? Who would you be when the energy of judgment shows up? Who would you be when the energy of not being good enough shows up? Who would you be when the energy of self-doubt shows up? Who would you be when people start to mirror to you and to want to speak over you their limiting beliefs? Who would you be when it's time to accept yourself, accept the things you like, accept the things that you don't like? Who would you be when you want to tell somebody no and they're begging for a yes? Who would you be when you wanted to go to sleep and somebody's asking you to go out? Who are you going to be That is what matters. Who are you going to be when loving yourself is hard? Because that is when you can truly embody the love. Would you accept yourself and where you are, or would you judge yourself from not being further ahead? Would you be kind to yourself, or would you talk to yourself and try to use unhealthy self-talk to motivate yourself? Would you be available to where you are in the process, or would you treat yourself less than because you're not hitting your milestone faster? This is what matters most, y'all, is who will we be when the energy of self-love, tuning ourselves to that energy, to that frequency feels hard. The question is yours. The answer is also yours. Who would you be? Because if you can answer this question, then you'll see that self-love is very easy. It is up to you, though. It is up to you knowing and being aware of your patterns, of your thoughts, of the person you are, of the way you show up to the world, of how you're acting versus how you think you're acting. Because self-love is a decision. You can decide to love yourself. You can decide to be that version of you that you feel really good about. The question is, would you? Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in the next video. Hasta luego, mis amores.